Today I'm going to be showing you a composition that I came up with for Art of the Carolinas. In case you don't know what Art of the Carolinas is, it's a really cool art exposition, and they have a lot of classes that different art teachers will come from around the country to teach, and it's held in Raleigh, North Carolina in November. And there's a select number of classes, usually over 100 classes that you can choose from, but the expo has a large amount of art supplies that you can buy at discounted prices. It's hosted by Jerry's Artorama, and so they do it every year in November, and this will be my third year to teach. I'll be teaching 3 different classes. One of them is an Albert Dürer watercolor pencil class, and I chose a mandarin drake duck to draw and with the watercolor pencils because it's on water. I thought it would be really pretty. I took the reference photo at the Flamingo in Las Vegas. Outside the Flamingo, they have like a garden area that you can walk around and take pictures of flamingos and some various animals, fish, and mostly fish and ducks, and some wildlife little trail that you walk through. So I took a picture of this beautiful mandarin drake duck. But when I got the picture and I got home, Walt helped me figure out which one he liked the best and which one I liked the best. And between the two of us, we came up with this one photo. After sitting on it and looking at it for a while, I realized that while I like the position of the duck, there were some issues with this particular photo. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through what I did in Adobe Photoshop in order to get the composition that I needed to create a good piece of art. So this photo, first of all, is a little bit out of focus. It's a little bit blurry, I guess. Not necessarily out of focus, it's just the contrast is not as vivid and bright as I remembered taking the photo. The duck is very, very colorful, and there's a little bit of light, bright light shining on him, so it was kind of dull in this photo. Plus, after looking at it, I started realizing that all this green area here, the green on the underneath him and the green on the outside, it doesn't really look like water. It's a little bit distracting. It's a little bit too busy to be a really nice piece of art. So what I did was I started off by creating, enhancing the saturation, and then I went and made it quite a bit brighter by dragging the adjustments for saturation higher, and I cropped it a little bit. So I started liking it, but even still, I realized that I had a problem with all this green. It's so bright, so vivid, it just kind of takes away from the pop of the duck. I also didn't like the fact that the duck's tail feathers were cropped so close to the end of the picture. I didn't want to center him because I know that a good composition is typically off center, and I'm trying to get as close to the 2/3 rule as I could, or the thirds rule of composition. There is, if you divide this into 3s, and you put a line here, let's just do it this way. If you take a line here, probably approximately 1/3, and you want to get the subject somewhere to lie in the thirds in the same way this way. And so I felt like the composition was good like this. My problem is I just still feel like he shouldn't have his tail feathers cut off, and he should not have all this green in the water. It kind of was distracting. So what I did was I decided to, let me get rid of these lines. This is just the grid lines to be able to lay out your composition and decide whether you have it where you want it. And then I decided to crop him in a little bit more because I think he needs to be more of a subject than the water, but still trying to keep more water to the right and more duck to the left, but also positioning him a little better. So I cropped it in. If you get rid of the background, you can see that I cropped it in a little bit more. I like it. I feel like the duck comes more into focus of the subject instead of so much of like here you get his shadow is completely like a duplicate, which is kind of neat, but it also kind of takes away from the pop of the duck. So by removing that part, I still have a little bit of the shadow, but then I still I'm able to kind of get him more as a central focus. After that, I decided that I need to take care of this tail feather issue. So I cut him out. And the way I did that was basically, there is this tool here, and you take this, it's the select tool, but there's different ones that you can choose from, and I'm choosing the magnetic lasso tool. And what I did was just went right over the tail. The magnetic, what it does is when you start to drag it, it kind of, you can click on it to station it, but it kind of like, what do you call it? It's like a magnet. It attaches itself to what it sees in a difference in value. So as you go around, you just have to drag the mouse, and it will, you can click if you need to make it attach to some area. So I can click the mouse to attach to the area, or I can just drag it. And then when I go back different areas, it will just kind of stay along the line. So I can just kind of go like this. It just kind of clings to it. I don't have to be super picky because we're not trying to make a perfect photograph. We're trying to get a composition. And so what I did was, after I got this whole thing outlined, I cut it, and then I pasted it and on a new layer. So when you erase this part, you see the layer where the duck was actually placed. And what I can do is grab that layer. And I know this might be a little bit too much information for those of you who don't use Photoshop. It can be a big learning curve, but this is just, you can find lots of tutorials on how to use Photoshop on YouTube. But this is just so you know what I had to do to get the actual final composition. So I took the duck then, and I can move him anywhere I want on the scene. And so I don't have to have him so close. I can move him over. And since this is a watercolor, it really doesn't matter, how perfect all this is, because the pencils are going to just be laid on in color. And when you go over it with water, it's going to look the way it looks anyway. Everybody's piece is going to be a little bit different depending on how they apply the water and the color of the albacore. But you can take that duck and just move him. And so what I did was I moved him where I wanted. And then I took a clone tool in the background. The clone tool basically takes whatever other piece that you see and copies it. So since I had two ducks now layering on top of each other, I basically went and took that clone tool, made it kind of big, and then I grabbed some of the rock and went over that back bird. So I got rid of him with the clone tool, just kind of dragging it around. Oops, and putting rock behind the bird over the tail feathers. And this takes a little bit of time, but it's fairly easy. And then I don't have to be picky because it's a watercolor. I'm just trying to get rid of that second duck. So I went around and did the clone tool all the way around and got rid of that background duck. Now the duck is still there. If I get rid of that one, and open just the background, there's the original, there's the layer with the duck that I'm erasing, and there's the new duck. So once I put these all pieces together and I put this duck where I wanted him, then I went into my filters, and I went to filter gallery, and I chose watercolor because I wanted to see what it was going to look like. And then I applied the watercolor filter to the final piece that I had created that had all this background cloned and cropped, and I like the colors now much better. The duck actually pops a little bit more. He's not competing with that bright green. I left some of the little bits of bright green. Let me get my select tool. I left some of the bright green in here just so that I would have some reflection on the water, but because it's a watercolor, you're going to kind of the mind is already going to look at this and know that this duck is either on water or kind of on the edge of water on a rock, just for the fact that it's a duck and in his position. So it's not really going to matter what color I choose for all this back here, and I'm going to let each of the students kind of decide their own piece as to whether they want to put more of this teal blue or more of this green or more of this lavender purplish color over here, gray color. But for me, I'm going to stick to pretty much this composition. I like how the duck now, the tail feathers are not right up against the edge of the drawing. He's not totally centered. He's a little more centered than I'd like, but I feel because his body goes off this way that he'll work fine with this composition. So this is going to be the final composition, and I'm going to use this watercolor as this watercolor filter added as my guide where I add the color with the Albert Dürer. Now I will print a actual picture like this with the correct composition, which is cropped down. You can see how it's cropped down here. The composition is more like this, about like that. And so if I crop that, now that's more like it is. So I'm going to print myself an actual photograph to be able to use the projector to be able to enlarge it and put it on the size paper that I want. And then when I use the reference, my reference will actually be this watercolor, because I've already gone to the trouble to design my composition, to tone down the green in the background, and to get the colors the way I want them. So I will use this as my guide, my reference, although I'll use this to trace any type of an outline or placement of my duck on my paper. So I'll go ahead and show you that part next. So I took my printed image, which is 5 inches wide and 3.5 inches tall, and my piece of Stonehenge aqua paper. And then to prepare for using the projector, I placed my paper down, but I don't want to tape it down just yet because I want to see exactly where the image is going to be shining. So I'm preparing by pulling 4 pieces of artist tape. I'm just going to take the tape and I'm going to stick it over on the side first, because if I tape my paper down now, I may have to pick it up and move it again after I shine it down from the projector that is up there on top on that projector stand. I'm using the Artograph Prism projector, and it also comes with a stand that you can order separately. I got them on Amazon. Then I open the top of the projector. I have to reach kind of high where I have it placed. It's adjustable, but this is a good place for pretty much all of my art. I slide it into the bracket, and then I close the projector. And I have to get it straight. If you're wondering what I'm doing when I look to the left, I'm making sure that my recording is still happening because I have it being controlled by my phone. So I snap it in and I turn it on and I close it, and you can see that it projects down onto the paper. And then I adjust the lens to make sure I have the image in focus. And once it's in focus and I straighten the paper and get the image lined up, I use the tape to secure the corners so that the paper doesn't move while I'm tracing. Once I'm done securing the paper, I make sure all 4 corners are secured and the paper's ready. I turn off the lights and I use a very light gray pencil. This time I am using a warm gray 2 polychromos pencil. It is not an Albert Dürer watercolor pencil. I'm using the colored pencil this time because sometimes when you are using, for instance, a watercolor pencil and then I'm using watercolor as my medium, I can lose my line drawing once I apply some of the water. So I want to kind of keep that line drawing. I'll be able to cover up with the darker colors that I apply on the drawing, but I want to keep it there somewhat. But it is a very, very light touch. If you are worried that you are going to have too heavy of a touch, then you may consider using an Albert Dürer watercolor pencil in light gray, just so that you don't have something you can't cover up. So you really have to have a sharp pencil and make very, very light lines in order to trace. Now I'm only tracing the duck. I don't really care about the water in the background because I'm kind of planning to just eyeball that part because it doesn't really matter if it's exact. It's all just going to be a watercolor effect anyway. One thing you might not be able to see is that I have that piece of glassine paper under my arm so that whenever I go onto the paper with my hand or my wrist, it does not get the oils from my skin on the paper. I want to keep the paper clean with none of the oils from my hand or wrist on the paper. So I'm trying to keep that glassine paper under my arm and hand. So it may take you a few minutes to trace the entire outline. You don't have to be super picky. Just do the areas that are the big shapes. The little shapes are going to be pretty easy to capture with the watercolor. Once I'm done, I'm going to use the measuring tape and just verify that I have the size and everything that I wanted. Technically, I did this earlier, so I already knew, but I want to make sure it's around 11 by 14. And sometimes you may want to mark the outside edges just to make sure you have it accurate. This piece is a little bit more important for me to have accurate measurements because I am teaching it at a workshop at Art of the Carolinas, and I need to know what size paper for everyone to bring. So I want to make sure that I keep it at the 11 by 14 because that's the size paper that I'm going to be supplying at the workshop. I see a few little places that I missed. Sometimes when you turn the light off, you will, or turn the light back on, you'll see some areas you missed, and you can go back and capture those little marks. So holding up my line drawing, it's so light that it's very difficult to see on the computer screen. So what I did is apply a filter on it in Adobe Photoshop so you can see what it actually looks like, that there really is a line drawing. I can actually see it in person. It's just harder to see it on the computer screen. So I'm doing this just to show you that it is actually there. And now that I've placed the duck on the paper, I can actually get my Albert Dürer pencils out and start drawing. So those of you who are $5 patrons or more will get to watch me as my other medium, and I work with Albert Dürer pencils tomorrow.